chapter 24. In his days Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldee, and bands of the Arameans, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke by the hand of his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight, for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not pardon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin his son reigned in his stead. And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the brook of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. And Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came into the city, while his servants were besieging it. And Jehoiachin the king of Judah went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out there all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon the king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained, except the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the chief men of the land, carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths 1,000, all of them strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. And Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of the Lord did it come to pass in Jerusalem and in Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Okay, let's go back up to verse 1. And we'll remember yesterday that Jehoiakim had become the king, and he had returned back to evilness. And it was in his days now that Nebuchadnezzar, this king of Babylon, which the prophets are going to mention so much, will become the important character of the story, at least for a while, because this is we began those great prophecies even of the end time. And that's where we're going to pick it up. Verse 1, in his days Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And we'll remember that Jehoiakim is God stands it up. And Jehoiakim is going to be the example of that which God is going to stand up in the end time. That's so you can see it now, far off. It becomes this example. That's basically what it means. And now in his days, when he was the king, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came up, and Nebuchadnezzar is the one who protects the crown, and he is the king of Babylon, which is confusion. And we'll remember this great Tower of Babel now, this great tower of confusion from the beginning, because that's basically all of it in a nutshell. And the whole thing is the same place, because from the beginning God's declared the end. Now we know what's going to happen to the great tower before we even start, because see, God declared it from the beginning, and even the book of Yasher would make it clearer. Verse 2. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, and bands of the Arameans, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by the hand of his servants the prophets. And we will shortly find, when we get to the book of the prophets now, that's exactly what the prophets were doing. The prophets were warning them now of what's going to happen, telling them to turn back to the law of God, turn back to the commandments of God, turn back to his statutes. But nobody was listening. So God sends these bands of the Chaldeans. And these Chaldeans, Chaldean means the clod breakers, because when you go through plowing the ground, there's dirt clods that roll up, and these clods are too hard for anything to grow in, and they have to be broken. And the Chaldeans were thought to be the wisest of the land. See, and breaking these clods represent those hard-headed ones who don't want to give over even to these understandings and whatever understandings we may be talking about. So that we have to have clod breakers, see, to go behind the plowers to break the clods. And we're going to find out now by the prophets a little bit about this. And the bands of Arameans, and these are the enlightened ones. We've heard a lot about these. They've been coming against Israel and Judah for years. And the Moabites, those that are like their father, those that are just like their fathers who want to establish this idolatry, because that's what we're talking about, the children of those that are dancing around the fire, and the children of Ammon, these of the nations, even the nations that God sent Israel in to drive out, that was left behind. Now, all these thorn bushes that was left behind. This is what all these represent. So God sends these against now Judah in verse 3. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did. So, according now to the words of the prophets, as they prophesied, that it was by the commandments of God. Now we know in Deuteronomy it was all written down and told to us from the beginning what was going to happen when they did this, because they chose them to make a king instead of making God the king and keeping his law and obeying his law. And Manasseh means is this one who causes to forget. He's the one that raised up all the idols in the house of God. He's the one that did all that. And for this was God's anger greatly kindled, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not pardon. And this innocent blood is those that are murdered, and there's nobody to be held accountable for it. We see Manasseh was the king, and he just went around killing people, nobody could hold him accountable. Now, and this murder represents a little bit higher understanding. And that when you destroy the spirit, you destroy the flesh as well. And this is murder to God. This is murder. 5. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Yes, we would find it there. So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his stead. So now Jehoiakim, this one that God stands up, he has died, and he has left Jehoiachin to reign instead, and that means God establishes. And we remember this even from the prophecies back, this thing that God was going to establish, this thing God was building. God is building something. 7. And the king Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the brook of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. So we'll see now this is even told by us, even in the book of Jeremiah, we would find this, that that this is what happens. The king of Babylon does come down and conquer Egypt. And Egypt is that land of closures. And we see now the king of confusion is going to take it over, at least the part of it, from the brook of Egypt, even that river that flows into this land of enclosures, and unto the river of Euphrates, even that river that springs forth abundantly with fruit. He takes it over. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months, and his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And Elnathan, or Elnathan, is my mighty one's gift, and he's of Jerusalem. And his daughter now, Nehushta, or brazen, brass, and we remember Nehushtan, it was that brazen image that that what they called the brazen image that Moses had made, this little brass snake. And she was the mother of Jehoiachin. And Jehoiachin was, my God establishes. And he did that which was evil, 9, in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. So we'll see that he carries on just like before in idolatry. 10, at that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. So it was during this period of time now that this king of Babylon, this great king of confusion, is going to come up, and he's going to take over and besiege Jerusalem, the city of the peaceful teachings. 11, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came unto the city while his servants were besieging it. So while now all the Chaldeans and everybody's come up and they're besieging the city of Jerusalem, the king of Babylon himself comes up. Verse 12, and Jehoiachin the king of Judah went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers, and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. So now we see when the king of Babylon came up, now that Judah did fall, it was taken over, and and Nebuchadnezzar carries Jehoiachin, that which God establishes, off to Babylon, even off to confusion. He carries him and his mother. This would be that which give birth from him, the woman that would give birth from him, off to Babylon. His servants, all those that would serve him, his princes, these that would carry on his seed after him, and his officers, these that would be made seedless. And he takes them off now in the 8th year, this new beginning even of this understanding, or this great circle of gold. 13, and he carried out there all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and he cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon the king of Israel had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. So we see now this great house has been smitten, just like it was prophesied, and we see that God raised this great house up, and it has been cast down, because that what usually happens when God stands something up or raises it up, it's usually going to be cast down. 14, and he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained, except the poorest sort of the people of the land. So they are considered safe and harmless now. So they are left in the land. And he carries away now all the mighty people. And we see now the mighty have fallen. How art the mighty fallen? See, they're being carried away in captivity by the king of Babylon himself. And we see now these 10,000 captives. This is for the fulfillment of the law, is why this is done. And the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained. So all these are going to be carried off. All these that made this idolatry. All these workmen that fashioned it. 15. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon. So we see now the king of Nebuchadnezzar now, this one who protects the crown, does carry away Jehoiachin, this one that God has established, to Babylon. And his king's wives and his officers and his chief men of the land carried he from Jerusalem to Babylon. 15. Now this would be the law and its grace. Now he's showing you that this thing did happen twice now. He's carried away all that Jehoiachin has, and all the men of might, 16, even 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths 1,000, all them strong and apt for war. Even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Even all these mighty men, these men that could have done something that didn't, because the king of Babylon was so mighty. And we're going to find out this king of Babylon did come in subtly, and he did come in quietly, and with pleasantness and smoothness. But now, here he has besieged the city with a great army, and he carries away captive now even these 7,000. Now, this is the perfect fulfillment of these craftsmen and these smiths, these ones that have fashioned all these idols that everybody's been worshiping. It is for the fulfillment. Now, he carries away all these strong that could have done something, 17. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So now the king of Babylon, this one of confusion, has taken Jehoiachin's, that which God has established, his father, who was Jehoiakim, that which God stood up, and now he's going to make his brother, Mattaniah, this gift offering of God, these gifts of offering of God, now it's plural, these gifts of offering from God, is king instead. That's who's going to be the king instead. It's Jehoiakim's brother, Mattaniah. And he changes his name to Zedekiah or Zedekiah, and that is the righteous of God. 18. Now Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And we'll remember her. She was also Jehoiakim's mother. And Hamutal means my husband's father is in the midst, or her father-in-law is there in the midst. And that would make her the feminine or the teaching of. And she is the daughter of Jeremiah, those appointed of God, and Libnah, where she come from, is this place that is made white. And she is the mother now, thou which give birth to Zedekiah, the righteous of God. And he's going to reign for 11 years. And the 11 years is this period of disorder now. 11 before 12. 12 is understanding. 11 be 10 and 1, the beginning of the law. These over this period at the end. And he did that which was evil, 19, in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. So we see now, he continues, even with all this wrath now of God pouring out, and the prophets crying and speaking out to him. We'll see now in the end they have not turned, and the prophets are going to tell us of this. 20, for through the anger of the Lord did it come to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, till he had cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. So, even by great wrath and anger, we see God has hardened the hearts now. God is controlling all these things, and he's bringing this evil even upon them, because they had done this great evil. They have turned now, and through great example, even after Josiah, we find this. They have returned to their ways. They cannot understand that God does not seek to be worshipped through idolatry. All right, we're going to move to chapter 25.